Do is just tell you a little bit about the PPP. Recognize, of course, that this is current guidance and things are changing pretty much as we speak. Congress enacted this law very, very rapidly and left the banks and the SBA to manage it after the fact. So for the first couple of weeks after this came out, there was literally guidance from the SBA on a daily basis as far as how this could be managed and would be managed. And that's really changed. It's gotten to the point where, for a practical point of view, we're getting guidance on a weekly basis rather than on a daily basis. So it's a good time to take a look at this stuff and figure out what we're talking about. So what we're going to be talking about today is the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and I'm open to addressing other questions that you might have if we have time. But feel free to interrupt me during this program. I'm not going to lose my place, I promise you. And if there's a question that you have about something, I guarantee you that there's somebody else in the group that has the same question. So don't be shy. Feel free to jump in. And realize that I am around. I do work from my home office, and I am here talking to people on a daily basis throughout the day. So you'll have my contact information, or you can get it from Jeremy later if you don't get it from this presentation. And if you have questions later, please feel free to reach out to me. All right. So here are some issues that we're going to be addressing today. How can I use the Paycheck Protection Program funds? What are the things that I can spend the money on? How fast do I have to spend the money? And will how I spend the money affect my forgiveness portion of this? What is the PPP forgiveness process? How difficult is the form to fill out? Who do I have to send the form to? How long is it going to take me to get an answer back when I submit it to whoever needs to get it? I received both an EIDL, an Economic Injury Disaster Loan grant, in addition to a PPP. Can I use both of those? And what is the overall impact of having both of those? If I hire my staff back, do I have to hire all of them back? And what if they don't want to come back? Is there a specific amount that I need to pay them when I bring them back on board? And what happens if I don't do that? And when I get the money, when can I use it? Is there a time limit on which I can use that money? And what if it takes me longer than I had planned and I don't get it spent in that short period of time? And what happens if I don't spend all of it? So these are all questions that people have. And so let's just jump right into how you can use the funds. So how can you use the funds that you've received? Well, some people have said to me, I've got greater needs than just payroll right now. What happens if I don't use the PPP funds for payroll? Well, the primary issue here really is one of forgiveness. This is a loan from the SBA. They've given you guidance on what they're expecting you to use the money for, but you can actually use the money any way you want. Under current guidelines, you can use 25% of the funds that you're getting for something else besides payroll and still get 100% forgiveness. But if your expenditures don't follow the strict guidelines, the loan either won't be forgiven at all, or a smaller portion of the loan may be forgiven than what you would have primarily liked. But remember that it is a loan, and you can use the loan any way you want. The issue here is not whether you're using the loan properly, but the question is, are you using it so that you can get forgiveness if that's something that's important to you? So you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't have anything for my people to do right now. So should I really hire them back? And what happens if I don't hire them back? Well, remember what the purpose of the PPP program is. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program, and it was intended to provide payroll for your employees. In spite of the fact that there may not be work for them to do, if you don't hire them back, then there's a likelihood that your loan won't be forgiven, or the forgiveness that you would have normally expected to get for the loan is going to end up being reduced. So how is that loan structured? Well, the payback terms are the maturity of the loan. It matures 2 years from the date of forgiveness application. And the interest rate is at 1%. There's no collateral required. There's no personal guarantee required. And the deferral period on when you have to start making your monthly payments is 6 months. Now, interest is going to continue to accrue during that period, but you can see that they've really made this as easy and painless a loan as I have ever seen. You know, with not just a 2-year maturity, but a 1% fixed rate with no collateral or personal guarantees. And if you pay it off early, there's no prepayment penalties or fees involved at all. So let's take a look at this PPP forgiveness process. I've told my clients, if there's only one thing better than being able to borrow money at 1%, it's not having to pay back the loan at all. And so the forgiveness aspect of the PPP is sometimes what I consider the most important part of this loan program in the law. So you get the money from the government to be able to run your business. And if you follow the guidelines, hey, you don't have to pay it back. That's a pretty good deal. So what's important to me on this whole thing is the forgiveness. So how do I make sure that the loan is forgiven? Well, there are really 3 questions that everybody asks about forgiveness, and I'm going to give you the answers to each one of them. So here we start at the top. What are the rules for spending the money? Why might my forgiveness be reduced? And what are the records that I should keep so that I can make sure that the forgiveness is followed through on? So here are some basic rules. Remember, it's not the SBA that's determining the forgiveness, it's your lender. The application that you fill out for forgiveness is sent to the lender, not to the SBA. Now, of course, the SBA has provided guidelines for everybody to follow, but it's the lender that you're working with that's going to make the decision on whether or not your loan is forgiven or not. So to be forgiven, the money must be spent during a very specific period of time. And there are truly 2 pools of forgivable money. One is payroll and payroll-related expenses, and the other is non-payroll or overhead expenses. So let's first talk about the timeline. All expenditures must be, at this point, all expenditures must be within 8 weeks after the loan is dispersed. So that means that the first day that they start counting is the day that those funds were deposited in your account. So if the funds were deposited in your account on a Friday, that Friday counts as day 1. And you have 56 days in which to use that money to be able to qualify for forgiveness. Any money that you spend on the 57th day or the 58th day will not be considered under the forgiveness provision. It's only the money that you spend between days 1 and 57. Or I'm sorry, 1 and 56, that 8-week period. Now, I will say that this is current guidance. Congress is currently in the process of trying to pass a law that's going to provide 24 weeks for you to spend the money, not 8 weeks. And how that's going to be managed is up to anybody's guess right now. I'm sure we'll find out about it later. So what is the timeline? Well, the timeline we've said is 8 weeks, except, and there's always exceptions, and this is the case here. So many companies delay their payroll for processing. So your pay period may end on Friday of this week, and you're not going to run your payroll until Friday of next week. So the payroll expense payments dates can be shifted so that on the PPP program, you can either consider payments that are made during that covered period or during the 8 weeks, or you can consider payroll that is incurred during the 8-week period, but not paid during the 8-week period. So you've got one way or the other way of looking at it. It's either when you're actually paying it, and that payment has to occur during that 8 weeks, or it's when the payroll has been incurred or when your people have worked. And then you consider that period during that 56-day period. And then that last payroll has to be paid on the next available payroll date. You can't delay it any further than that. But non-payroll expenses have to be paid within that 8-week window. So if you want to use the timeline in which your payroll expenses are incurred, but you have non-payroll expenses that you're going to consider, you then have 2 payment periods in which you have to consider. One being the 8 weeks for payroll, and the second being the 8 weeks for your non-payroll expenses. So here's something that you need to know about the forgiveness application. First of all, the form is 11 pages long. Now, that looks really scary when you first think about it, but most of that is in worksheets and descriptions. Now, it's going to take time to start collecting the information, filling out the worksheets. So my suggestion is that you start collecting that information when you start spending the money. Don't wait until the last minute to do that. You can start collecting the information that you need as soon as you start spending those funds. fill out the worksheets and use the information from those worksheets to fill out the forgiveness calculation form. That form is just one page of the entire document, and it's pretty straightforward. But the worksheets are going to provide you with the documentation that's going to tell you what to fill out on that form. And then there's one more page that's reps and warranties, where you're going to sit here and tell the government and guarantee your lender and the government that you use the information, you use the money legally, that you did everything correctly, that the employees that you hired were hired properly, and things like that. And then that's the document that you're going to sign at the bottom. And those are the only two pages that you need to submit. The rest of the application, like I've said, is just worksheets and instructions. And those worksheets don't need to be presented to the bank, but you should keep all that information in your source documents together just in case the bank wants to see that information later. All right. So what are the compensation limits for employees under the Payroll Protection Program? Well, the compensation cannot exceed $15,385 per employee during that 8-week period. And if you take that $15,385 and you divide it by 8 to figure out what it is per week and then multiply it by 52, you'll come out with $100,002. And that equates to that $100,000 of annualized income that the government will allow you for forgiveness. And this includes wages, commissions, tips, and bonuses. Now, for owners who are not on a payroll plan with their companies and are, let's say, a sub-S corporation, where you file a Schedule C with your 1040 and you take the earnings from the company as not as a dividend, but as a draw from your business, they will calculate what your compensation is justly for forgiveness based on taking 8 weeks out of your total net income that's written on your Schedule C for your 2019 return. So they'll literally take that 2019 return net income, divide it by 52, multiply it by 8, and that's the most that you'll be able to get forgiven. But even in that case, it can't exceed $100,000. So to be honest with you, if you made more than $100,000 off your business last year, you really don't even need to do this calculation. All you need to do is just figure $100,000 as your cap for the year and that $15,385 as your cap for the 8 weeks. But there are also other employer payroll related expenses that are forgivable expenses. So employer payments for bonuses, commissions, or hazard pay, vacation pay, sick leave, or family leave is also considered. Employer contributions for group health care coverage, that's also a forgivable expense. In addition, employer-related payments for retirement plans, pensions, the employer contribution for pensions, 401k plans, IRAs, and also state and local taxes on the payroll are also forgivable expenses. So remember, the forgiveness is going to be based on a very simple ratio. 75% of that money that you borrowed can be forgiven for payroll expenses, 25% of it for non-payroll expenses. They want your money to be primarily spent on payroll, not on the company's operations. In addition, those non-payroll expenses can include mortgage interest, but not principal, for mortgages that were started before February 15th, 2020, and rent or leasing payments for a business that had the lease in force before February 15th, 2020, and for utility payments for electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet access, for which service began before, and I know you all know this date, February 15th, 2020. Now, the interesting thing is that if you had delayed making your electricity or your gas payments during January and February, and you paid them after the PPP money was received, that's also deductible. Okay, the deductions are based, the forgiveness is based on the amount of money that you paid during that 8-week period. But you cannot include non-payroll expenses for advanced payments for interest on mortgages. In other words, you can't prepay your interest on your mortgage and consider that deductible, nor can you consider advanced payments on any other non-payroll related expenses. So for instance, for your utilities, you can consider the payments you made for utilities that are in arrears that you hadn't paid in January and February. But if you prepay your utilities for June, July, and August, that's not acceptable. So here are the times we talk about things that you might do that would result in your forgiveness being reduced. So for instance, your forgiveness could be reduced if you reduce the number of full-time employees following February 15th, unless you restored them back to your employment before June 30th. Now this relates to a reference period, and you get to pick one of two reference periods in calculating what your FTEs are for the purpose of the forgiveness. The first is February 15th through June 30th of 2019, or January 1st through February 29th for 2020. Either of those periods are the periods in which you would consider your full-time employees, and that would be the number that you have to hit for the number of employees that you have during the forgiveness period. Now, if you're a seasonal employer, like we have some clients that are summer camps, and they have employees, obviously, that they don't have during the year, but they hire them during the summer camp. If you're one of those employers, you can consider your seasonal period, your reference period, to be May 1st of 2019 through September 15th, 2019. So that period from May through September, middle of September of 2019, would be your reference period. And your forgiveness could be reduced if you reduced your employees more than you had during the reference period, or if you reduce the salaries that you're paying those people
on calculate,
unless you restored that back during the period that we're talking here up to June 30th. And if you reduced that payments by a particular percentage, that would literally be the same percentage that they would use in considering your forgiveness. So let's take a look at the records that you need to keep to be able to apply for forgiveness. So to document your payroll, all you need is your bank account statement or your third-party payroll records that show the withdrawals for payroll during that period, tax forms or third-party payroll reports showing the tax payments to the Treasury or to the state and the local authorities, or payment receipts, or I should say, and payment receipts for insurance or retirement plan payments. In addition, for non-payroll expenses, your mortgage interest payments, you need to be able to keep track of those. But remember, your mortgage needed to have been in place before February 15th. And my recommendation is that you use an amortization schedule to figure out what the actual interest payments were so that you don't get confused and mix some of the principal payments in with that. In addition, your business rent and lease payments, if you deduct a home office, you have to have done that in 2019. You can't just start doing that now and start deducting the cost of working at home during the COVID crisis. And business utility payments, just having receipts for all of those payments is also acceptable. Now, to document the number of FTEs that you had, the documentation that you could use would be to have your reference period again, pick one of the two reference periods, and then you can document the number of employees by providing your payroll tax filings, your state filings, or your unemployment filings, which will list the number of employees that you had during that period. And then you should send in your application for forgiveness as soon as you can. And I've heard a number of different dates on when you need to have that submitted. My suggestion is you talk to your bank or just wait for further guidance at this point. I haven't seen anything definitive on what date is the last day to submit those. Now, what happens if you got an EIDL loan, or really not a loan, but that $10,000 EIDL grant? Can you keep both of them? No, you don't have a choice of whether you're going to keep the EIDL or keep the PPP. There's a place on the loan application or on the forgiveness application for the PPP that says, did you get an EIDL loan, an EIDL grant? And if you answer yes, then it asks you for the amount of the grant, and that grant is deducted from your forgiveness application. So how long does the approval period take for your forgiveness application? Well, expect to be notified within 60 days following the period that you've submitted your application. Now, my expectation and hope is that they'll do that. They may do that prior to that, but 60 days is at this point the window within which that you need to wait and sit on pins and needles and cross your fingers and toes. Now, everybody's concerned about audits to certify need. The SBA is only going to review loans that are in excess of $2 million for economic need certification. Now, there are two critical certification comments that they've made, and I'll just give you the quotes on that. The first is that the current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Or the second one is the funds will be used to retain workers and maintain payroll or make mortgage interest payments and lease payments and utility payments as specified under the Paycheck Protection Program rule. In addition, the SBA can review any forgiveness application for accuracy. So I guess the question is, how do we really prepare ourselves for a potential audit to assess our true need? Well, there's no real guidance on this at this point, but certainly I think being able to provide reports showing the working capital needs, the cash flow needs of your business are important. The ability to be able to show the amount of available cash that you have either through your accounts receivable or the company's line of credit are going to be helpful. But there are also some uncertainties. If of your accounts receivable, for instance, how much of that money is going to be at risk because your customers are not in a financial position to be able to pay their bills? And what about your ongoing operations? How much additional cash is going to be needed because your sales dropped and you don't have the same kind of cash flow and availability that you had last year at this time? And you may need additional money to cover those overhead expenses, including payroll costs and other expenses not covered by the PPP. Now, this is certainly uncharted territory, and the best thing I can tell you is that you should have a full understanding of the cash needs of your business and the funds that you have available to you to be able to serve them. Now, what is the chance that you're going to get audited for need? Well, I don't know, and I don't know anybody who can give you a definitive answer on that because I think we're all in the dark. Certainly, if you borrowed less than $2 million, you're not going to get audited. If you did borrow more than $2 million, I think there's a chance. And I think you're better off being in a position where you collect all that information and have it available so that you can document what your cash needs will be during the next 6 months. So it's important, if you need help, to understand what your current status is. Are you still waiting for your money? I mean, if you're waiting for the money to be paid to you out of the second tier of funds and you haven't received it yet, or if you really have a question about your PPP forgiveness, then you've submitted your application and you're not getting any information back, talk to your lender. There's nobody at the SBA who can answer your question for you. But I think your best bet is to find an executive at the bank who can answer your questions. If you just talk to the branch manager of the bank you deal with, or talk to your relationship manager, your RM, I think it's unlikely that they're going to be able to give you an answer any more than say to you, well, you've got to check back with the bank, and the bank has to be able to give you the answers. I'll give you 2 very quick stories. A client of mine has got a fairly significant loan from for the PPP, and they submitted it on Friday. Their CFO knows a senior vice president of Chase Bank, and he called them after he submitted the loan on Friday and said, I want you to give close attention to our application. He found their application, put it on top of the pile, it was processed, and they had their money in their account on Tuesday. That's pretty quick. In my situation, I bank with PNC. I submitted my application on Saturday. I received no information from them for 2 weeks until I finally found out that it had been submitted and accepted. And then I didn't get any information from them for another week. I called a person that I know very closely who's a senior VP at PNC. She made 2 phone calls and I had my money in 48 hours. Now we could sit here and say, well, you might have gotten it anyway, but I think the reality is I probably wouldn't have received it as quickly if I hadn't had somebody, or if my client hadn't had somebody that they could have put the pressure on. So just one very quick thing here. We're making a special offer to any business owner that might need some help. We're offering a full 8-hour day with one of our staff CFOs to do whatever you might need to help you out with your business. Create a cash flow forecast for your business, develop a strategic financial plan for your business, create a plan to present to your lender about how much money you need and how you're going to be able to pay extra loans back, to evaluate your products or services for profitability, to prepare a plan for reopening your business. I mean, this is no strings attached, no commitments, just some assistance to help you get your business back on track.